I think I would say my. Yeah.
All right, we can start.
Okay. So, Vivek, do you want to go first?
No, no, no. I'll go. I'll go later. I want to hear the members' thoughts.
Okay.
Oh, hi, Samartha. Glad you could make it.
Hello, I still haven't seen the film. I just thought I'll drop by and say hello to
Oh, okay. There might
Hi.
be spoilers. Just warning.
That's fine, that's fine.
Okay.
Mohammed, would you want to go first? I'll need some time to collect my thoughts.
Okay, let me try. If there is disturbance from my end, please let me know.
Hmm.
Uh, so Iran is my land. My first impression would be that the landscape I really loved. The places is traveling, the open desert, and other thing I really love that when he is having those thoughts, those poems of Sufi or poets poems, those people come around him, and they walk behind him. That was really new to me. I haven't seen anybody means the that words play in the mind, but here the people are they're talking, coming near him, talking into his ear. That was really nice for me to observe. But coming to the understanding of the poems, it was really difficult. I tried to open my Google and type the words so that I can get the real meaning of those words, but I couldn't understand the poems. But apart from that landscape, I really loved the cave kind of thing, the ladies how they are wearing clothes. I haven't seen the culture of Iran, so it was good to know. It was like a tourist tour through my mind. And after watching that, I went to YouTube and I watched one documentary, I think Rick Steves, uh, what is current situation in that area, how the people are. And yeah, I got to know a lot of historical backgrounds like Khomeini, uh, how what women are conditioned there. It was also good. Coming to the women aspect, gender issue, there was also good talk that yeah, classic poets and the contemporary poets, how they are comparing the women. Yeah, I think the director was trying to bring the gender issue uh, in our ancient literature. But yeah, I failed to really, what to say. It didn't touch me deeply, but apart from that, the landscape, the images, the poets coming and sitting near him, that they are transporting themselves into that field. There is one typewriting lady sitting. That was really nice. I really love that scene, how he has crafted that out. Uh, apart from that, yeah, I'm waiting to for your words so that I may appreciate the real theme. There are many poems in it, but I failed to connect to those poems. One thing I felt was that the author is fighting against the political dominance, where he has to, what to say, the political influence has is trying to restrict him, trying to subject him to change the thoughts of the poets. uh, I think that I felt that yeah, he's struggling to hold the original thoughts of the poets. Uh, yeah, apart from that, I think I may learn more as the discussion progresses. Yeah, that's from my end.
Kritik, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I have to agree with what Mohammed said because uh, although it was a very beautiful movie and there's some great imagery throughout the film, but I struggled to keep up with it because it was kind of full of poems, and I had to constantly look up and down at the subtitles and at the film too. But Yeah, as a visual experience, it was really great, but I really wish I could understand it better. That's it.
Okay. Mohammed, you remember we had this discussion on Chain that the movie was slightly difficult to understand, and we had a long conversation about what the things in the film mean, and I think both you and Samartha came to appreciate the film in through that conversation. And I had asked you guys, uh, are you in the mood for more films like this? And you guys said yes, let's do it. So this is one of those films. It's a slightly more difficult film. It's not very easy to watch. It doesn't give you all the answers. It's something that you have to constantly keep up with the film for to be able to pick up the clues and solve it. So yeah, I appreciate the fact that you know you guys watched the film and still, even though you don't feel like you enjoyed it, you guys are still here. So it's nice to see that. Now, in terms of first reactions, I think this movie is special. There's multiple things about it to talk about, but on the core, the reason why I think this is special is it's very hard to do good abstraction. In the sense, abstract art, anybody can do abstract art, but to do good abstract art, it's very difficult. So you, so sorry about the car, car and the rain in the background. So there are many films which are abstract and don't have much meaning to it. So I had a professor in college who said anyone can make abstract shit. So, and it's mostly true. You can pick up a camera, you can put some shots together and call it an abstract film, and that'll be the end of it. But one thing I've noticed over the years is that when filmmakers try to uh, bring abstract art into their films, they run out of ideas immediately. And this happens in many films. And this is a discussion I had with Vishal about um, what's that Paul Schrader film about the Japanese guy?
Machine.
Mishima.
Yeah. So me and Vishal had this discussion about Mishima, that this guy wants to present things in an artistic manner, but he's run out of ideas. So whenever directors run out of ideas to stage something in an abstract manner, they go to theatrical tricks, meaning whatever they're doing could be done on a stage. There's no reason for it to be in a film. And if you're not using the filmmaking language to tell a story, then why bother? Let it be a play. So it's a harsh view about that film, Mishima, but I still stand by that. That if you're making a film, there has to be some cinematic quality to it. And that's what I appreciate about this film the most. It's a very small film with very few characters, but the stage is vast. They use landscapes, they use cities, they use caves, they use subway stations. So even though I'm sure it is made in a low budget, but it feels bigger than it is. So yeah, from a cinematic point of view, it's very enjoyable to watch. And then we'll dissect and deconstruct the film later on. Nikhil, you next.
So in terms surrealism in Iranian films, I think this is the first one that that I've watched. Iranian film usually it's mostly about social issues or coming of age stories or transitionary periods of the country. And this seemed like textbook surrealism, and I actually was I was quite in line with what Vivek was talking about, especially about abstractism. And I think it touches on a lot of other issues, including the struggles of a writer, a general nature of censorship, the patriarchal structure of society, and on top of that, the earlier forms of motivational speakers in the manifestation of those poets. Um, it so my immediate opinion about the film was I was actually taken aback because of the surrealism, and it was neatly stitched. You didn't really feel like it was out of place, and that was something I enjoyed a lot. I actually wanted to ask um, what prompted Vivek to pick this film.
Oh, so besides what I've already mentioned,
Hmm.
mm, yeah, what you said makes sense in the sense that it talks about a lot of things, but it doesn't spoon feed you anything. So I encourage uh, everyone who's watched the film and felt like they liked some parts of it, but they don't fully understand the greater themes, to watch it again, because this film will reward you. Because the second time you watch it, the things that you've already noticed will be put aside and you'll be paying attention to new details. And I promise you, the film is not that difficult to dissect. So, mm, starting with the way they set up the opening, right? You they set up the fact that this guy thinks in poetry, or rather, he daydreams in poetry. That's how, like, he's neck deep in poetry due to his research. I'm assuming he's a PhD student and he's writing his thesis. So he spent X amount of years studying, researching, dissecting, analyzing these poems, and yeah, he's got a poetry for every single event. In fact, him and his dad play a game of Antakshari of poems. So that's also shows that he comes from a culturally uh, rich background. That he's been introduced to these poems from a very early age, which is why both father and son have such a vast knowledge of different poetries. And to answer why did I pick this film? Um, yeah, because of the fact that there are multiple things which are brought up in the film, but never in words. It's there, but you have to find it for yourself. And we'll talk about it as the discussion progresses. I just don't want to take up a lot of speaking time. Nikhil, are you there? Nikhil, did you just give me a question and disappear? Okay.
He might be having some issue.
Yeah, I think it is network issues. So,
Yeah, that movie part.
yeah.
I wanted to talk on philosophical aspect of the movie and
Okay.
literature.
Yeah.
How we try to interpret the thoughts and the words of those poets
Hmm.
to suit to our contemporary lives, means the modern life. uh, yeah, political dominance is there, we have to be careful while writing it down. uh, but my question was, should it be allowed to, what to say, reframe their words, uh, losing its essence, or should we stick to the traditional norms that we shouldn't change anything? Like Sanskrit, for example, Sanskrit is losing its essence. Nobody is speaking, but we respect it out of our culture and traditional beliefs that it has essence. Similarly, in what I'm talking on the, what to say, the thoughts the poets have originally and what we are doing, like a scholar. If suppose I become a scholar, will I be given the authority that I can manipulate his words to only to suit the current generation, or should I stick to the traditional uh, norms that no, I should respect his thought? That, I think that was the main issue in the film, that the scholar is struggling, that what should I do? Should I change the words? Should I make changes so that the my paper will be published, or should I be content that uh, I respect the thoughts and words of the classic authors? What do you guys feel?
Can I go first?
Yeah, yeah.
So there usually arises a dichotomy when you talk about state control, I mean, censorship in particular, and freedom of individual thought. You cannot really have one of them is codified. The state structure is usually codified, whereas in terms of individual thought, it is a lot more free flowing. So there might come an instance quite quickly where the codified law somehow becomes outdated, and it really doesn't take a long time for that to happen. And on top of that, if a state has been institutionalized, it usually asserts control. And control in terms for over individual thought, if not exercised, I think it could be a sense of anarchy for the state, which is
Hmm.
why there is so much censorship when it comes to writers or any kind of artistic expression for that matter.
True.
So either you have a state or you have individual thought. I mean, this is purely my opinion. Purely uh, uh, a personal opinion.
Hmm.
So I would like to hear uh, rest of your opinion as well.
If I may, I'm going to talk about this a little bit. So the issues of censorship, right? Whether what should and should not be allowed to be published. And I think Vishal made a brilliant point in yesterday's discussion about what censorship is and what freedom of speech is. So if any YouTube viewers are
Can
listening,
you be a bit louder, Vivek?
sure, one second. Is it better now? Can you hear me?
Vivek, I just wanted to
Yeah.
add here
Yeah.
that yesterday
Yes.
we talked that a person who is writing out of his own, means original, the art is coming originally from him, then censorship issue, okay, we can keep aside. But when we are working on the classic authors, some classic poets, are we supposed to, what to say, make required changes what we feel? Because the words are his, but thoughts are ours, we are interpreting.
Okay. So yeah, let's talk about that. So the issue is one of censorship and second of editorialization. So editing and editorialization are two different things. For example, in case anyone is not familiar, please bear with me. I'm going to define these words. Editing is when you edit a document. You're making some changes and you're rephrasing what you say. Editorialization is when you take a message and phrase it to mean something else. So this is a big problem in journalism, that you might have a headline which does not represent the truth of the story. So let me think of an example. I'm trying to think of an example. For example, if there was an accident and instead of saying an accident happened between a bike and a car and two people are injured, they will editorialize it to make it sound something more sellable, to get more clicks, to get more views. They'll say a rich man went over a poor, a vegetable vendor.
Okay, putting masalas.
Putting masala. Yeah, that is editorialization. So find out who lived, click now, something like that. That is editorialization. So your question is whether we should stick to the original facts or should we do something of our own. Now, see, art is open to interpretation, right? And even though I always talk about objective qualities of film, there is a subjective experience in it also. So to some degree, you are free to voice your particular experience about the artwork. So if, for example, you come and say that I really dislike this film, this film is shit, that is also a valid opinion. I can't disagree with that. But if you say the cinematography of the film is bad, then we have a debate going on. So yeah, in terms of interpretation, everyone in the world has a right to a subjective experience. But when it comes to the objective truth of the matter, it will always remain the same, no matter who investigates.
Yeah, that's thanks. Actually, in the movie it happens now, wine and the women, there are equal weightage given for the both side. It was really nice. I didn't observe that, but as you are saying, wine, according to the person who we read, he can relate it to his experience as he wants. Either wine can be good, wine can be bad, alcoholic. So women also.
Right.
Yeah, that's interpretation is subjective. So yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And coming to censorship, so in the film, I forgot who it was, but one of us mentioned the film touches on gender issues. In fact, I thought it was going beyond gender issues because
Which movie, Vivek? Sorry.
this film, current film.
Oh, okay.
So I thought it went beyond gender issues because the clause in under debate was that an ancient author has written something misogynistic, and the student wants to publish it in his thesis, and the bureau, I don't know who that person is, the government guy, wants to ensure it is not there, it is deleted. And he's saying why are you saying things against women? It is not right to do so. And you're exaggerating these things. He said, I'm not exaggerating. There is literal proof. This poet, that poet, 2, 3, 4, 5 poets have said certain things about women. I don't want to say negative things about women, but I can't forget that in our history, these people have existed and they have said certain things. So it is a matter of the government guy wants to protect the pride of the country by saying that our history is glorious, our history is perfect, our ancient poets are legends. And this guy wants to say, yes, our ancient poets are legends, but there are some certain issues which have come up, and it's important to remember they were also human, so they made mistakes. So that was the real conversation going on over there. That criticism was being prohibited. The government guy only wanted to hear nice things about the poets, whereas this guy wanted to show whatever he finds through his research, good, bad, or ugly. He wants to put everything down and let people judge which poet was correct, which poet was incorrect in his opinions. And they both, share examples of poets saying nice things about women, poets saying terrible things about women. So yeah, in terms of censorship, I that was a very interesting point that the film touched upon. Nikhil, Kritik, one of you take over.
I'm actually of the opinion that this film was made after the Iranian Revolution, so it was mostly a theocratic society.
It was made in '99, a fairly recent film actually.
Fairly?
Recent film, 1999.
Oh, I'm speaking of the cinematic timeline.
Oh, okay. Is it not a contemporary piece? I thought it was contemporary.
It is a contemporary film because
Okay.
the revolution was in the 70s, 72,
70s, yes.
73.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, uh, in some sense, adding to my point, theocratic society would usually revert to mass censorship of this kind.
Yeah, the censorship is there, but I was saying that what is the kind of censorship that is being imposed?
Hmm.
The censorship is about criticism, that you're free to analyze the ancient poets, but don't criticize the ancient poets. Because the government guy, to be fair, quotes equal number of poems as the researcher, right? He's also very well versed in poetry. It's not like he's just there because he was lucky. He seems to know about poetry too, but his views are strongly aligned with whatever his bosses have decided. So the question was about, can you criticize the past, or is the past holy and uh, yeah, you can't touch your history and your legacy. You can only say nice things about the past.
Yeah, it also holds good for religious texts. Uh, uh, there are a lot
Yeah,
of criticism. I read somewhere like even Manusmriti, even in Quran, there are many
right,
like
right.
gender issues.
The present is not perfect, so how can history be perfect?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Because we have to return back to the old times.
sorry, Kritik, what was that?
Oh, nothing much. I mean, they
Voice
say
is a
the
little
present
soft, I
is
think.
not perfect because the past was perfect and we changed from the past.
Wait, are you saying the past was perfect?
That's in their minds, at least the people who.
Oh, okay. Ah, right, right, right. Yeah, I've seen that. That There are people who tend to believe that the past was glorious and we are victims of, XYZ, either victims of.
That is usually the case with nationalism, I suppose.
I don't know politically which
Okay,
which
that is
side it aligns to,
from
but
what I've seen. From what I've seen, at least with the current interpretation of the India being a Hindu Rashtra before, and that that being the current motive of the government, it it was usually it is usually supposed that that interpretation arose during the independence era, and uh, yeah, a historical record of ancient India, particularly of the Indus Valley civilization and the Gangetic civilization.
hmm,
They show immense trade with Iran, Greek, and the upper, uh, not England, but countries surrounding Europe, and especially in the Middle East. So we have architectural influences, we have coinageal influences, and also linguistic influences. There are I suppose some hypotheses which support the theory. I'm sorry, hypotheses which suppose Hinduism or the Vedas, in particular, was developed outside of India, and some located to Syria. And these are based on actual archaeological records.
hmm,
So,
hmm.
what was the original point? Why did I miss this one? Give me a
You
second.
were talking about nationalism.
Yeah, nationalism. Yeah.
Go. I wanted to bring one thing up before this sidetrack, but talking about censorship, and I really liked what was going on there when they were trying to discuss the meaning of the metaphors in the poem, with specifically of wine, I think,
Hmm,
and that was very interesting. And there was also this guy who constantly came and said, "I'll tell you a very, if you're smart enough, I'll tell you a story of cat and mouse." And
right,
he
right.
came twice, and that for some reason it reminded me instantly of that uh, Jorge Luis Borges quote. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, but that quote where he says, "Censorship is the mother of metaphor," and
Hmm.
the mouse being the metaphor and the cat being the state of, and it's a constant cat and mouse game where the metaphors change, and when they figure out the metaphor and then they bring a new one.
Oh wow, I didn't think of that. And that's a great interpretation. It kind of makes sense because later on in the train tracks, you see, poets being all depressed and they're sitting besides the rulers of their time, and the person who shoos them away is the government guy.
Hmm.
Like who let him in, shoo him away? Yeah, it seems to line up with what you're suggesting. And Nikhil, I wanted to add to what you were saying. You were saying that people who assume that past was great and we are victims of the present is due to nationalism. I thought about it for a second, and I think we can expand that category to extremism, not just nationalism, because I believe
Nationalism is essentially extremism.
terrorists seem to believe that America is evil, and uh, you know the. Can you name some other extremists? I'm sure we'll find the answers along similar lines.
I understand why you're calling it extremist, but can
Yeah,
you call it extremist if that is the norm? I mean, the average person genuinely believes the past was greater. Everything was amazing before the British. I mean, at least for Indians, you can see people like everything was amazing before the Britishers came.
they
Uh,
can believe whatever they
ev-
want, but
and can you
that
call it
doesn't mean they're right.
extremism when it is the average belief? What I wanted to ask.
Sure, you can.
Mm.
Extremism is the lack of nuance. Lack of nuance is having zero weight given to the other side of the argument.
Perhaps I think okay. Maybe I was. That's. I mean extremism more as a number first game.
And regardless of what people believe, a fact, or sorry, a statement being popular does not immediately make it true, or does not make it right.
Of course not, but
Yeah.
it can't be called extreme when it is the norm. That's what was this going
Can you
on.
explain in the context of the current statement about past being
Like
great?
I don't know if there's. It was just a quick response to what you said. I don't believe it has any ties to what we were talking before that. But you mentioned that that glorification of the past and all is a form of extremism. But can it be called extremism when everybody does it? But yeah, because no,
If it's so, do we agree on the fact that it is not true?
I mean, yeah,
Okay. So it's a false statement which is perpetuated in society, either through WhatsApp forwards or either through, in-person congregations. Repeating a falsehood does not make it true, right? And
An entire country can be extreme.
yeah, it
There are
can be.
many instances in history where,
I hesitate to say an entire country can be extreme because, yes, the
oh,
outlook
the
from
entirety of the population will not be, but
correct.
uh,
That's what I mean.
uh, if considering a country as the as a culmination of the majority and its voted representatives, it can be as national policy extremist.
Hmm.
Nazi Germany would be an ideal example, and fascist Italy also.
There's extremism in almost every ideology. You may
Extremism is essentially going to the uh, end of the spectrum,
Yeah, that's
hitting
what
the
I said. It's lack of nuance. There's no
mm,
middle ground. There's only one way,
true,
and that is the only correct way.
true.
Uh, Even in Buddhism, there are extremists. I believe there are some Buddhist monks who burned down temples and mosques and churches in Myanmar.
Hmm.
So, and Buddhism, people assume it's a fairly harmless religion, and for the most part, they're right. But there are extremists in that religion too, and I'm saying any ideology, Marxism or what's the right side one called, Nikhil disappeared. Network issues probably. So whatever ideology, there will be extremists of in every single one of them.
Yeah, I think you're correct. Where that word spectrum really clicked it in. There are extremists in a spectrum of beliefs.
Extremist in the spectrum. What do you mean by that?
You can be left, right, center. You
Ah,
have a full extreme on the one end. Yeah.
yeah, extremists. I'm not talking about anyone in particular. Any extremist will not entertain any ideas from the opposite side of the table. They will stick to the idea that their opinion or their um, point of view is the only correct one. They find it difficult to admit or difficult to accept that people live very different lives. You may believe in something I don't, but that doesn't mean you're a bad person. It's just a different lifestyle, different set of beliefs. Um, yeah, it doesn't say anything about you as a person. How you treat people is, I believe, the main characteristic that I try to look for. How people treat each other, and because in the current circumstances, it's very easy to get swept over by propaganda. And I know some very nice people who have, turned towards extremist views. I don't blame them. I blame the propaganda. It's the victims of propaganda. And I think all this conversation will make more sense in the upcoming film that we'll be discussing, which is The Thousand Cuts. So I recommend everyone to definitely watch that film. They talk a lot about propaganda, the power of propaganda, and how they brainwash people, and how can we be alert about not being swept away by propaganda. Because trust me, all of us would like to believe that we are intelligent, but we can all be victims of propaganda. Nikhil, are you there? I think he's not here. And any points that come to mind from the film? So we can talk about it till Nikhil comes.
I was wondering what you guys thought about the various scenes in the deserts, like the canal marriage scene at least. I have no idea what went on there, so I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say.
Oh, the canal marriage scene. Did you have any, clues or ideas about what it could be?
I don't know, maybe some very surface level thing, like man, or maybe like
Is it like a cultural
sacrifice,
thing or?
sacrifice rituals, those kind of
Uh,
really.
but they don't die, right? The people who are married
She
to the.
doesn't return though, does she? So it could be
Okay.
considered a sacrifice.
No, but the other ladies come back. They come back the next morning. They're not required to live down there.
Wait,
I actually had a hard time interpreting the canal marriage as well.
Okay.
And I also had a hard time trying to wrap my head around surrealism
Uh-huh.
with the poets occasionally dropping by like and
Okay. With the
talking.
poets, I can.
Can and Vivek, additionally, can you
Yeah.
give us a very tiny brief about surrealism just so we can have a much better second view? That's okay.
About what surrealism is
Yeah,
as a whole.
very tiny
Okay.
brief.
Sure, I can. So, all through history, humans have been creating some form of art, right? It started with cave paintings, then it went to religious paintings, and some guy discovered perspective, then there was depth in the paintings, and paintings became more and more realistic as time went on. Every generation of painters had some new form of innovation. They studied light, they studied colors, they were able to make better pigments to represent reality more accurately. Towards uh, the later years, I want to quantify it. Towards the 19th century, almost 1800s era, we had reached realism, almost photographic level of realism. Then, late 1800s, the camera was invented. And earlier, the only way you could preserve an image is to hire a painter and pose for them for 6 to 10 hours a day for multiple days or maybe weeks. And in the end, what you get is the only option you have. Versus a photograph now takes around 1 or 2 minutes to take per photograph. Exposure was really slow back then. And don't quote me on 1 or 2 minutes, it may be longer, it may be shorter. But culturally, an interesting thing happened is that now artists felt um, technology had overtaken their job. That why would anyone need artists anymore? Anyone can go to the photo studio and get a portrait taken, and it will be much better than any painting you could produce. So why spend 20, 30 years of your life mastering the brush when any working class man can get a photograph for, the price of a daily wage? So then there were artists who thought that, what, art is not just about realism, it's about more than that. It's about evoking an idea, it's about evoking meaning, and it's about having something to say. And that was, the precursor to surrealism, that is Dadaism. And then, the next generation of artists came and took it full blown into abstract territory. For example, the most famous one, who's the melting clocks guy? Do you guys remember? Dali, Salvador Dali. So Salvador Dali and all these guys, they were like
Which
full.
one?
Salvador Dali.
Yeah.
Yeah, Salvador Dali, Picasso, all these guys, like, they went full blown surrealist. That they don't even bother to suggest things. They have metaphors and meanings hidden behind various images which do not represent reality at all. And so it became the job of the viewer to sit down and try to interpret it, which was already being done for older paintings, but now that becomes the center stage. Not the quality of the painting and not the quality of the brush strokes and not the realism. So yeah, it's a different kind of art. A lot of people don't like it. I most of the time don't like it because most people who do abstract work do a very poor job at it. Very few people who really understand how to pull off good abstract surrealism or good abstract art. So yeah, that's the brief opener to what surrealism is. But
So,
Nikhil,
yeah.
yeah, you were saying you don't know why the poets keep showing up, no?
Yeah.
So I mentioned it in my, I think, opening thoughts that these poetries are his internal dialogue. He daydreams in poetry because he's a researcher. He spent a lot of years studying all these classic poets, and he's grown up in a culture of poetry because him and his dad have a back and forth about poetry. So you can understand that he's spent a lot of time with poetry in his life, and he seems to daydream in poetry. And the poets who do show up right in the background, they only speak in poetry. They don't say anything else. And that's because, and this is my interpretation, that they only speak in poetry because that's the only part of them which is left alive. The poets themselves are gone, but their words are still alive, which is why they show up in human form in the background. Nikhil, are you there? Nikhil?
So, from my understanding, it's usually the case that you have a cultural influence on these surrealistic interpretations. And that could probably explain the reason they have a desert and a canal appearing occasionally.
What do you think that might be? Any ideas or suggestions?
I suppose, I mean, at least at my immediate viewing, that my assumption was Iran has mostly been a barren land. and there was a very strong scarcity for water except for the Tigris River, and that was where the Babylonian civilization grew up. And but the rest of Iran was essentially barren and mountainous. Representation of water is usually associated with life of some sort, or a sense of rejuvenating force.
And they say that no, these villages are abandoned because the water dried up.
No, I mean, I suppose that was
Hmm.
the general notion of the element of water in these images, which is why it was very perplexing to get a more decent interpretation quite close to what the creator intended.
I can tell you what it's about, but I would prefer to say it in the end, just so that we don't stop the discussion.
Yeah, I really like these small moments, and we see the stream. There's a small stream constantly flowing multiple times when he's interacting with people who live in the desert. And water does play a huge role. Access to water, at least, plays a huge part in their lifestyle. But maybe even, I don't know, the scene where she enters the thing, right? The canal is kind of like a, I don't know, maybe a reverse birth kind of thing. I have no idea what was going on there.
You're talking about the old guy and the giant bread, right?
To add to what I just said about life, I mean, water particularly being a rejuvenating force and a sense of life. I also based it on the occasional episodes we see on The Last Temptation of Christ, where you have Jesus Christ walking in dead, barren land through his process of uh, finding an answer or finding God in particular. And it mostly happens in these kinds of empty spaces. So my assumption was much of sorry, my assumption was much of these metaphors are encoded in water versus dry land.
Hmm.
And Mohammed, I mean, we didn't hear anything from you for a while. What do you think about any of this?
Uh, Not much. Yeah, I'm listening. Yeah, I may if I have any questions. Yeah, please continue.
So this film is very unusual. Um, I think we can all agree on that. But it's unusual because it doesn't follow many of the classic rules of filmmaking. There is no three-act structure. There's no character arc. There is, no build-up, no crescendo, no heroes, no villains, nothing. So, but it's still interesting. I think that we can agree that even if we didn't like it, there is something interesting going on that makes us curious about what it could be.
Yeah, about whatever movies you are curating, one thing I have observed that you give the ownership to the viewer. It's not about spoon feeding the information. What all other commercial movies does, but here,
Hmm.
yeah, I am putting my intellectual energy in understanding this means the theme and the I'm really enjoying it. Whereas other film doesn't, it's everything open, it's everything put in front of you. But yeah, this movie also and all other movies in the curated list, they make us think. Like yesterday's movie, it was still I'll be watching it again. to
Hmm.
go into the depth of to go to the depth. But yeah, it
Hmm.
was. And in this movie too, I have a lot of scene, that you may help me understand that few is that he's entering into a canal, in a not canal, passage, narrow passage, and he's coming to a metropolitan city. Means it's open up.
Hmm.
Uh, is there something like that really, or it was some meant? I don't know.
Hmm. What do
What
you
it was.
think?
It mostly felt like he was trying to get back to reality of some sort because he had dwelled enough, or
They
at
do
least,
wake him up, right? At the
yeah,
subway
hmm,
before the final scene. They wake him up and like, "Excuse me, Mister, where? How did you get here?"
yeah,
Yeah. Hmm.
yeah.
So,
It
any
felt like
interpretation on the cave to city transition? Like, what was it? How did it? Why is it there? What do you think, Mohammed?
Yeah, I thought that he just fainted on the that under the
Uh,
construction, and just he was dreaming all this.
uh,
I don't know, but
okay, okay. What about you, Kritik? Was it real? Was it a dream? Was it supposed to mean something?
I do. I think maybe it's obviously supposed to mean something, but I thought it was forced back into reality by the people who were waking him up, and him entering the city from the desert was like a quick, cinematic trick,
Hmm.
like of how they show what's going on in his mind through the pose, like just a quick sleight of hand like that.
But the driver was quite stressed, right? I can't leave him in the middle of the desert. He'll die. I will never leave my passengers. So that means he's quite far away from the city. It's not like he's close to the city.
yeah, yeah.
Otherwise, the driver would not be so stressed that I can't leave him here.
I mean, that does tie into the surrealism thing. It doesn't have to make perfect real world sense.
It does.
Uh,
I'll tell you. I'll tell you guys later. But so what were we talking about before we came to?
I
Uh,
think the scenes in the desert, like, trying to find an explanation for it. And also, most recently, I think it was how he woke up and how he found himself in the city.
hmm, hmm. Okay. So, oh yeah, I remember. Okay. So
city.
this film splits when the car breaks down. The car breaks down, and the rest of the passengers remain in the car or remain around the car, and this guy wanders off, basically chasing his poets because he sees these poets in the distance, and he starts, um, following them into the desert. When he was in the car, he was supposed to go to Tehran to get his permit, right? That's what he told his dad, that tomorrow I have to go to Tehran and hopefully I'll get the permit. Otherwise, I have to keep going back and forth. So he gets lost in the desert. But the main story continues. You still see the back and forth between him and the government official. That means he reached Tehran at some point. And then he gets rejected, then he goes back again, and this happens 2 3 times. So now there are two stories going on, one about him being lost in the desert and one about him getting his permit to get published. And uh, his discussion with the government official, right? It's almost treated like a court. It's a bureaucratic office, it's nothing special. It's there in every country in the world, but they treat it as a center stage of a court with all these poets standing around a fortress. And I was trying to think what that means. Was it simply because they are going to reference all these poets, and all these poets are going to make a quotation and then disappear. No, I think it was a little more than that, because all these poets are there, but not all of them speak. So, in a way, the poets of the past are a form of history. So, history is witnessing what is going on. If he gets the permit or not, we'll find out later. But whatever happens will be registered in history. So that's why they put all the poets watching the debate. Then he meets the old guy in the desert who has a nice little campsite next to a stream. So he has food, he has water, and he has a friend. That's all he needs in life. And I think, I'm not sure, but I think it's the same actor who plays who plays one of the poets, the bearded guy, Hafiz, I think, the same actor. And this ritual about the marriage with the cave, right? That's to some degree played for a joke. That
Cannot.
yeah. So for some degree, it's played to a joke that, oh, it's a silly tradition. And this guy actually is going to play music. And he tries to play his Shehnai in the desert to catch these researchers' attention. They are in the same square piece of land on the desert plain, but they can't hear each other. That music is lost in the wind. It's not being heard by anybody. And it'll make sense by the time I finish. And then you have the actual marriage thing which is going on, where they marry a canal, either to a bride or a groom, and after one day they come back out. And this guy discovers one of the canal where the guy is not coming out. He's refusing to come out. And he asks them, who are they? Who is this guy? And they say he's a guy from a neighboring village. He used to come and entertain the kids, and we chose him for this ceremony. And he was so upset that he couldn't fulfill the role. Meaning, like, he went in, and next day there was no water, so he was upset. He was so upset that he refused to come out. Now, this particular canal is slightly different from the other one. It is literal hole in the ground, right? It's vertical going down. So the researcher has to climb down with the rope to go downstairs. And what I believe is the case is he falls into deep depression and he refuses to come out from there. And why does he refuse to come out from there? Because he was not able to make the water flow. The water didn't come out of the caves, and it didn't reach the people. Later on, the water does come out, right? The water does come out, and the women wash their clothes. When the water comes out, there are books in it, there are musical instruments in it, there are ancient scriptures in it. So water represents culture over here, is what I think, my interpretation. That it represents culture, and this land is barren due to the lack of culture. And this guy, he spent all his life daydreaming in poetry, thinking that, you know what, he's going to reinvigorate poetry in this country, and he's going to bring a greater appreciation for the classics. But he was not able to do that. He was not able to publish his book, or he was not able to, achieve what he imagined. So he falls into depression and refuses to come out because he was not able to make the water flow. Then we find out that he goes further into the cave, right? Sorry, 1 second. Before we go further, the reason why I think he went into depression is because the person in the cave is himself. It's not some second person. It's the same guy. And even in the story, the woman tell him, he comes on a bicycle from a neighboring village. And in the city scenes, we see that when he has to go for a meeting with the publisher, he goes with this same green bicycle with all 7-8 poets in the back, riding on the same bike. So we know it's the same bike and the same person, and yeah. So then he says, which way do I go? He doesn't know what to do with his life anymore. He thought this was his life's purpose, to bring literature, poetry back into the public conscience, and he wasn't able to do that. So there is nothing for him. At least that's what he thinks. And the researcher asks the cave guy, where does this side go and where does that side go? And they say something very poetic. I'm trying to remember, but I can't remember. But I think he says one side goes to the void and the other side goes to
existence.
No, existence is up. He said existence is up. So if you want to go back to reality, go up.
Oh yes.
So the other side is something equally poetic, but I can't remember. So he decides to follow that path and keep going. It's complete darkness. He doesn't know what's ahead of him, but he still goes. And he reaches a dead end, and there's nowhere to go from here. But someone from the other side helps him by opening up an entrance. Then comes the subway part, right, where he wakes up. At first, he doesn't wake up. First, he goes down to the subway and he hears some announcements of a lady there. I forget what they say in the announcements, but I'm sure that is also vital. Maybe I need to watch it again. But he goes down to the platform and a train passes by. Every car has some construction equipment, because in the physical world it's still a train platform. So it has some construction equipment, but it has soldiers and kings and rulers from different eras and the poets of that era. And every poet looks very depressed. One poet is, looking down. One poet, string is being pulled out of his mouth. Another poet, his poetries are being burned in front of him. And then there is him. He sees himself on that train. And I thought that was very clever, because through the journey of... Nikhil, 1 second, I'm going to mute you. I can hear my voice. So through the journey of researching poetry for the past 30 years, he has become a poet himself. And now he's, a part of the literary history of the country. But it still doesn't answer how did he get to the city, right? So the getting to the city part is not literal, to be honest. I'm pretty sure the car guys eventually found him and took him to the city, but from subway to the city is a a little more metaphorical, in the sense that he went from the past and came to the present era. That through the years, through censorship, every poet suffered, and due to censorship, the water stopped flowing. Due to the water stopped flowing, the villages were abandoned, and after that, it became a desert. And at one point, you even see a castle in one of the frames. They show you a castle where the king used to live and the whole city used to be, and it's now in ruins. And their interpretation is, yes, it's because of water. And the country as a whole has become a desert, barren desert, because of lack of culture. And even now, the censorship still exists. It still prohibits him from writing analysis and criticism of poetry. And it will exist in the future also, because you see a little girl, 5-6-year-old little girl, she has to get a permit for saying what she thinks, because she's not studied poetry. She doesn't, understand the classics. She just says what she thinks. And that happens to be very good poetry. And she has to get a permit for that also. So it seems that the way forward in Iran is always by suppressing art, or suppressing culture, literature, music, whatever it may be. And there is a very beautiful and subtle clue about this. When he climbs out of the subway, he gets in a taxi, and you see the taxi go down a huge highway. The highway has a lot of trees on the sidewalk, but the trees are completely dry because there's no water. And on the radio, you see there is traffic from this street to that street, and the passengers want to go to XYZ street. Every single street is named after a poet. So it's not like the poets are forgotten. The poets are celebrated. They're remembered. But the culture is lost. So the film is really about modernization and the suppression of culture through censorship. That's what I think.
Sounds quite reminiscent to what has been happening in India as well, and seems universal.
Yeah, it happens everywhere.
True.
Yeah. But does what I say make sense, or does it seem to line up with the film, or do you disagree with something?
With the eclipsing from the subway to going back up to the city Tehran, I felt the episodes of surrealism was mostly with his interaction with the poets, and whatever happened outside of it seemed like it had some basis in reality, but they were uh, they were either made hyperbole to strike a metaphorical sense.
The surreal parts are definitely in his mind, because you go back and forth between the office and the, fortress courtroom. Fortress veranda, not courtroom. Right? You, in the same conversation, you go from the office to the fortress to back to the office. So it's definitely in his imagination. So the whole episode about depression and meeting Hafez in person and getting bread from Hafez. Oh, maybe him getting bread from Hafiz is like he's earning his living thanks to Hafiz, because his thesis is mostly about Hafiz, right? So, maybe he's able to eat thanks to the existence of Hafiz. So, yeah, all that was definitely in his mind, being depressed and the lack of water and all these things. And the books drying, right? Like he rescues the books from the flowing water because they were about to be wasted with the stream if nobody rescued them. And him rescuing is, I guess, him writing his thesis that I'm going to save them, I'm going to preserve them, and I'm going to bring it back to the current generation.
Hey guys, I gotta leave now, but thanks. I've been listening sort of passively to the entire conversation. Very enriching, and I'll catch the rest from YouTube.
Okay. See you next week.
Yep, yep. See you guys.
Okay. See you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Mm, so I'm not really well acquainted with. I'm supposing the poets were Sufi poets, if I'm not wrong.
I don't know. I have no idea actually.
Okay. Uh, with it seemed like, I mean, at least with my understanding of Islam, alcoholism is haram, and there were repeated references to wine, uh, sharing different metaphorical senses with each poet. So I was a bit I mean, I was a bit confused with what was being implied there, because culturally it is mostly frowned upon, but there were these brave references to alcohol.
Oh,
And
but
from my knowledge, I think alcohol is still forbidden in Iran.
yeah, but you have to remember, before the 70s, it was not an Islamic nation. So there was the historically, in ancient times, the dominant religion of Iran was Zoroastrianism. If I don't know if I butchered the pronunciation.
True, Vishal. Sorry,
So
Vivek.
yeah, and over the period of years, the Islamic influence got stronger, and a lot of the Zoroastrians fled. Many of them came to Bombay during the Mughal era, I think, and now we call them Parsis. So they're all Persians. Not We call them Parsis, but they're Persians. And they opened a lot of cafes in Bombay, and Irani chai of Bombay is actually very famous. So yeah, going back to the poets, I'm not sure if all the poets referred uh, were Muslim or not. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. But yeah, historically, there were more than one religion. Yeah.
Interesting. And Vivek, since you are essentially the SME here regarding abstract art,
What is an SME?
subject matter expert.
Oh, I thought it's small and medium enterprise. Because in all my legal documents, they use SME. So that's what I'm used to.
Okay,
Subject
in that
matter
sense,
what?
contextually, at least an SME here is a subject matter expert.
Expert. No, I'm not an expert. Okay. What about it?
So you spoke, I mean, when we started the discussion, you spoke about your teacher mentioning how abstract art is open for everyone and anybody can do abstract art. but to make really good abstract art, it takes talent. So, what
Hmm.
made you feel this film as a piece of abstract art
Hmm.
is better than the contemporary abstract art that you notice, or the contemporary abstract films that we watch?
The most important criteria
Mhm.
is always that it has something to say. The second most important criteria, that it is following some sort of internal logic, and that logic is consistent. I'll give you a very simple example. In the movie Ek Ghar that we saw last month, the color yellow is used for fear, right? Fear and paranoia. So throughout the film,
Yeah.
whenever we see yellow, you're basically entering the psyche of the protagonist, that now he's feeling this anxiety. So that consistency is, I'm very sorry about that. That consistency is very important. And people who don't know what they're doing, they will not be consistent with such things. That it would be very irritating for a viewer if it starts off with yellow and then turns out it's not. It keeps changing throughout the film. Or second thing always happens in bad films is it picks up a subject and never talks about it ever again. So it makes you wonder, why was that point even raised? So then, in terms of abstract, I talked about it earlier in the call, that a lot of filmmakers, even great filmmakers, run out of ideas when it comes to doing surreal abstract stuff. They go back to theatrical tricks. They set up a stage and they set up a set, fake looking set, and they shoot it to make it seem like the character's psyche. But this film doesn't do that. It goes out into the outdoors, and it uses very creative ways to make the film more cinematic. And
But
even
isn't the whole?
something
I'm sorry.
little, even something as little as, multiple people on the same cycle, right? It's such a simple idea, but it is iconic in the film. That image stays with you, or at least it stays with me. And the idea is very simple, that these poets never leave his his thoughts, but the effort they went to get that 5 second shot is so much. Can you imagine, like, buying another cycle, getting it modified, and making sure it can support the weight of, I don't know how many, 7 8 people, and fairly old guys. So it's scary for them. If they fall down, it's like a big health hazard, insurance problem, liability problem. So they they went through a lot of effort to show us whatever they've shown in the film. And I'm assuming it has to be a low budget film, because art house films are generally low budget, and especially when you're going in surreal dimension, very few distributors want to entertain you. Yeah, Nikhil, you were saying something.
If we are considering a piece of art to be consistent with its logic, even in the case of a surrealistic uh, piece, I- isn't that the whole notion of challenge? Isn't that the whole notion of surrealism, to challenge the underlying logic? So even if it doesn't really goes on to maintain the consistency, should it be frowned upon in any degree?
I'm not sure if I fully understand the question. Can you elaborate
So
by what isn't it its purpose to challenge?
so surrealism as a movement, in some sense, developed to challenge the underlying logic. And if I'm correct until here. challenge
No,
our
see,
notion of reality and challenge the basic underlying logic of.
surreal basically they were trying to differentiate themselves from the photographers. They're like, okay, you guys can do realistic photographs, so fine, we give up that portrait business. We're going to have our own ideas presented in our own format
Of course, of
that
course.
photographs can never do.
But characteristically, this the difference arose mostly by them challenging the notion of underlying logic of reality. Yes.
Not challenging, but rejecting the notion of reality altogether.
Okay.
Hmm.
So if a surrealist film
Hmm.
isn't conforming to the consistency of the logic it builds, should it be frowned upon? Because it rejects logic altogether anyway.
Okay. I get it. So this argument is along the same lines as everything is art, right? For example, I take a red paintbrush and I make some spots on my door. That is also art. Who are you to say it is not art? And some people believe that, some people don't. And the most prominent and beautiful example of this is there was supposed to be an exhibition. I think it is Paris. I can't remember correctly, but there was supposed to be a great exhibition. And there's one artist. Um, oh, the exhibition was for sculptures. It's an important point. So, exhibition was for sculptures. The city doesn't matter whether it was Paris or not. But this one artist sneaked into the museum at night and put in his own piece, put it in a glass box, and put some velvet rope around it to keep people away, and sneaked out. Did not steal anything, did not break anything, just put his piece there and left. The perplexing part is his piece was basically your general household, um, what's it called, water closet or toilet. And that became a real point of contention. And this happened in like around the same surreal era. It was a big point of contention. Is this art? Just because you put it in a glass box and put some red rope around it, does it become art? It's a household water closet. Everybody has one. But it raised a conversation. It got people talking, it got people thinking. And his point was, if that if if that is not art, then what is? The fact that it made you think about something, it made you question a lot of things, and it ignited a passionate debate. It has served its purpose. Whether that art is beautiful, that's a different story. But yeah, it did what it had to. So this example is called this artist was called Duchamp. You guys can look him up later on. And this story is infamous. And maybe you guys can tell me if you went to a museum and you saw a toilet in a glass box, would that piss you off, or would that be in line with, okay, I can see how this is art?
I'm guessing it will mostly confuse us.
Hmm.
That is interesting.
Yeah, Kritik, what
Yeah.
would happen if you saw a toilet in the museum?
I mean, I probably wouldn't accept it.
Can't hear you actually.
Is it okay now?
Yeah,
Um,
Now?
yeah.
okay, tell me.
I know I'd definitely be confused, a little bit offended, but
Offended. Okay, that's interesting.
of the, it's kind of, what do you say, preposterous to do that, but of course, but I would, at the end of the day, agree with that, because uh, a lot of my, these things were ideas about what it art can be has been made because of, not because of it, has been, I've kind of derived it from, F for fake, the Orson Welles one. It really troubles me that there should be people who decide what is and what is not, or what it can be, or what can it not be. And since I'm definitely against that, I would definitely accept this.
So, if I interpret correctly, your opinion is that everything has the potential to be art,
Yeah, yeah. I didn't want to say it out loud, but yeah,
but it implies that statement, right?
yeah, yeah, definitely.
What about I don't know, a Karan Johar or Govinda movie?
It
But if
can.
everything
I
is art,
mean,
nothing is art.
it
No,
can.
no,
I mean, maybe we're not seeing there's some incredible quality that is not apparent to us. In the future generation, they might see it. I mean, that's what happened to a lot of
fine.
these.
We may not have seen. We are all, amateur film enthusiasts, but professional film critics have degraded it.
And who are they? I mean, they're just also people at the end of the day.
Okay, fine. Other filmmakers, great filmmakers, have derided it.
They're also just people at the end of the day. I mean, didn't it wasn't like, okay, I'm going to take a huge example here. Hitchcock for a long time was considered just another commercial filmmaker, and you know, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, in a bunch of critics in France found value in his films.
Not suddenly, by the way. Hitchcock was always considered a great master filmmaker. It's just that
He was just
his
considered another
greatest
commercial.
piece, Vertigo, was ignored commercially, critically for a very long time, and it was rediscovered after his death. That's a different episode, but he was always considered a director's director. That every filmmaker tries and strives to be at that level. He was always in that zone. Otherwise, can you imagine a 19-year-old coming from England to the US and making big budget films? It doesn't just happen.
I mean, of course, it doesn't happen, but I don't want anybody there to be. Obviously, people are deciding now, but it can't be set in stone.
Hmm.
Sure, today it is might not be like
So does
but
that mean the
But
role of a
by that
critic
notion, would it
is
mean everything is, if everything is art, nothing is art? Because there would be no visceral distinction between a Karan Johar film and Francesco Rosi film, for that matter.
I mean, whatever you call art is art. That's it.
then is there a role for art critics, film critics
Yeah,
in
sure.
society?
They are the ones who are holding the having conversation about it, trying to figure out,
Okay.
its meaning, whether uh, it has any connection to the real world or any internal meanings it has.
Is there a role for museum curators, because the curators of that exhibition did not put that piece there. The artist went himself and put that piece there.
So I don't understand your question. Of course, I have
So
to.
the people who work in the museum of, I don't know, whatever that museum was, they put an exhibition for sculptures. That toilet was not included in their exhibition. The artist went and put his work over there. So is there a role for curators?
Yeah, definitely. They do define the taste at the end of the day. What is
But you
seen
said,
and what is not
who
seen.
are they, right? Like, what gives them the right to call something art or not art?
I'm just saying we don't have to accept it.
Okay.
It
So,
can.
hmm,
You can agree or disagree, but
hmm.
that doesn't mean we should stop
But
them.
if critics don't have the right to decide whether is or is not art,
I'm not
how
saying not have
does
the right. I was trying to say, their words are not set in stone. You can either respect it or not respect it.
By the way, don't misunderstand me. I'm just debating for the sake of debating because that's
I
what
know,
this
I know.
this story is supposed to do. Uh, because if you said it is not art, then I have different questions to ask.
But Vivek,
Yeah.
there have been instances where uh, things which are not generally considered art have turned into art eventually.
Okay.
I think in the case of Impressionism, a lot of critiques lambasted Monet,
Hmm.
but eventually it started to pick up uh, a sense of charisma around it, and you got Renoir and Manet and
Hmm.
even Callebo
Hmm.
following in with the same tradition of Impressionism.
Hmm.
And I think that Dadaism has a similar story to tell.
This has happened in films also. Films
Hmm.
came out, nobody saw it. It didn't win any awards. Critics
Hmm.
didn't write nice things. But 30, 40 years later, thanks to film societies like this, people found a film and realized, oh my God, this was ahead of its time. And that can also happen.
So in
So
that sense,
it's a difficult question to answer.
true.
Who gets to define what is and is not art, and what gives them the authority? And and if you do accept that everything is art, the question is, where do you draw the line?
True.
Perhaps I'd like to rephrase. Everything can be art.
But who decides?
Anyone. I mean,
For
I
example, let's assume I'm an accountant.
discussion to what role a museum curator or an art critic has if
No,
everyone gets to decide on art.
to be a devil's advocate, assume for a second I'm an accountant in a corporate company. I have no experience in art, but I have decided that uh, whatever you have written today on a piece of paper or a napkin is art, and I want to put this napkin in a frame and send it to the museum. Is that valid?
uh, it's it's valid to him at the end of the day. You can
So you're
agree.
saying art is fully subjective. There's no objective element to it, is it?
Yeah, sure. We can agree or disagree on subjective elements. Yeah,
Okay. So can I pose another question, or is it getting
yeah, yeah, sure.
irritating already?
No, no,
Okay.
no.
Okay. So if art is fully subjective, in that case, what the hell are they teaching in art schools? Because people are paying thousands of dollars to get degrees. Why bother? Because you can just make anything and call it art, and
Well,
you're
others
already an
also have
artist.
to call it art.
Sorry.
Others also have. You have to convince the others also.
Okay, fine. I
But
take
now,
a
yeah, getting back to
sales
your,
and marketing course and I market myself as an artist. Is that enough?
But Kritik,
I
if
think
it's
this is
supposed to
very
convince
interesting.
everyone, then there would be no piece of art which would be ahead of its time.
What, Nikhil? Hello?
Nikhil, can you repeat that?
If a piece of art is supposed to convince everyone, then there would be no art that would be ahead of its time.
No, there has to be consensus, right?
In that case, I mean, we would circle back to the whole question being very difficult to answer. But
No, a lot of
if
people have to
there is
agree.
consensus, essentially understood that it is something that uh, it is something of a masterpiece. If not, we wouldn't really discover new art, which, like I said, would be ahead of its time.
So I answered this question earlier in the discussion today
Hmm.
that anyone can have a subjective opinion. I
Hmm.
love it, I hate it. That's a subjective opinion. this piece is great or this piece is a masterpiece has to be backed with some credible evidence.
Hmm.
And for something to be considered, this is my opinion, feel free to disagree. For something to be considered art, there has to be independent consensus between a group of experts. I'm not saying they should get together in a room and decide. I'm saying I'm in India, the other person is Russia, different people from with nothing in common, they all have similar observations to make, and their assessment is that this is an artistic masterpiece. Because if it is true, you will always reach the same conclusion. For example, math, for example, right? Like people say math is the ultimate form of truth because no
Hmm.
matter who solves the equation, the answer is always same.
Hmm.
I would like to
But
share something on the subject. Uh,
Yes,
I had
please.
this question that there is something called classic novels. I had always this question that who defines these classic novels and why should we read and why all suggest that first we should start with this classic novels so that we can appreciate other literature also. So when I tried, Fyodor Dostoevsky, Charles Dickens, Jane Austen, I think why I like them. One, maybe I may have been influenced by other people's thoughts. So I started to see those work through other people's perspective. But more than that, what I felt was it was connecting to me, though it was written in different era, though it was written by a person who lived a different life than me, but still it talked to me, and it was very relevant to my daily life too, related to all topic like crime and punishment. I could relate it. What he's talking, what turmoils is going on with his psychic turmoil he's going through. I think anything, if it has to be art and somebody has to be a authority on that art, I think it should speak to you irrespective of time, place, and the maker. Uh, I think I feel that yeah, as you are pondering on who should be given the authority to curate something as art and something as not art and how to classify things. Yeah, it's really difficult, but I think if it speaks to you, uh, that's more than enough.
Mohammed and Kritik. Answering to part of Mohammed's question, uh, from my very meager acquaintance with literature, I picked up Dostoevsky's Adolescent very recently. So, speaking from that, classics are mostly those books or those works of literature that defined a new style of writing. Particularly with Fyodor Dostoevsky's writing, you see um, the literature going toward the life of a common man, with crime
Hmm.
and punishment, adolescent, and uh, hmm, Anna Karenina. Okay, I'm sorry. Anna Karenina is
Leo
Leo
Tolstoy.
Tolstoy's. Yeah. So you see a different style of writing and you see different types of characterizations, and this is what, at least from my understanding, defines a classic, at least objectively.
Hmm.
And coming to art, you have a certain set of objective parameters which uh, uh, tell these art critics or museum curators something quite different from they have seen from the artist's contemporaries. And
Hmm.
these objective parameters is what leads them to suppose something is a classic and something is probably not.
Hmm.
And this is mostly influenced by the cultural norms of the period. Hence, we usually have periods of rediscoveries of uh, artworks that weren't really appreciated during its time.
Mm.
And Vivek, you can correct me anywhere because this is from a very amateurish point of view.
No, I don't want to correct you,
Mhm.
but I'm trying to understand. You're suggesting that innovation defines a classic. There has to be an element of innovation in a work
Hmm.
for it to be considered a classic.
At least from what I've seen in literature,
Okay.
because back then, at least with Russian literature, because that is what was brought up, and that is what I started out in terms of literature.
Hmm.
Leo Tolstoy mostly wrote about the aristocracy. Although his style of characterization was quite different from his other contemporaries, like Pushkin and uh, Lomonosov.
Hmm.
They were not really contemporaries, but they were great Russian writers.
Hmm.
So with Dostoevsky, you see a stark shift in that, and which is why I suppose Crime and Punishment has a kind of weight that probably his other works doesn't really command.
Mm.
Hmm.
When I meant classic, I asked this question to my professor that why do you call certain works as classic? Then he said that if the art or the literature remains relevant throughout generations, then it can be called as classic. That was what I was
But
thought.
relevance is mostly subjective, no?
I was
Hmm?
going to say that I don't know how to define a classic. I didn't think about it enough to say so, but I was under the impression that if a piece of work, film or music, doesn't matter, or literature, is passed on generation after generation after generation, and it keeps finding new life over the years,
Hmm.
then it has sustained interest of the population over a long period of time enough to be called a classic. And
Yeah, that makes sense, Vivek. Yeah,
it's similar to what your professor said, right, Mohammed?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But Mohammed, I really liked your point that you made about art being it has to speak to you, but there is a small problem. That is also a subjective response, right?
True, true.
Art is speaking to me, so it's a subjective response.
Yeah,
So
and
how do
to
you
to
solve that question?
appreciate that, I think we need some background or knowledge, experts not help to appreciate that. I truly agree with that.
Okay, so your suggestion is that you need some sort of art critic or curator or something like that to help you understand what is and is not art.
Yeah,
Okay.
that can be, or else we have to go through all, which is not hard. There are a lot of films. Uh, if I have to find a
No,
masterpiece,
not
then
film. Let's talk about anything. We can
hmm.
talk about paintings, literature, poetry, anything. But
Yeah,
who
yeah.
who gets to decide is the question we are trying to
Um,
solve.
yeah, I 100% agree with what Mohammed said. It has to have a personal connection because, but to each person, and when that is there for many people, it can be called a classic, But I'm not saying that critics are not worthless. They are very important, and they do. The best critics are a kind of artists themselves. They influence the art themselves. But you don't have to play by their rules at the end of the day. You all said mathematics is the ultimate truth, but because the solutions are, you'll reach the same endpoint, but that's only because the rules have been made by the mathematicians. Uh,
Actually, it's because the models are quite simple when you compare it to art. The problems I mean, at least mathematicians take up are usually quite simple or made simple just so they can arrive at a solution.
But
Yeah,
Kritik, so
it's mathematics is a construction, which is what I think I know.
yeah,
And
Kritik,
the same thing. Whatever perceptions or opinions we have is also kind of constructions, and at the end of the day, the expert will have more authority than the accountant example you gave. And the reason why I think he has more authority is because he will be able to provide better justifications for his opinions.
Kritik, let's say me, a normal person, claims to be a mathematician and say, I have a new theory. I agree with every rule of mathematics, algebra, geometry, trigonometry, everything. But my theory is that 8 plus 8 is 35. Will you accept that?
But you're not playing by, you're not following the rule of algebra at the end of the day.
No, I'm just saying everything is true. But my theory is that 8 plus 8 is 35. You know what will happen? Every single electronics in the
See,
world will break
that's because
because
it's
everything is based on binary, and binary takes 8 bits as the base to 1 byte. So every software, even your motherboard software, the screen that you see before your computer starts, even that will break. And how do we know 8 plus 8 is 16? Because if you put 8 pieces of any object together with another 8 pieces, you can go line by line and you can find 16. So there is some objective truth behind the rules of mathematics. It can't be based on theory, always.
I
Um,
have, yeah.
Vivek,
Yes.
mathematics usually function on a certain logic,
Yeah, I'm
and
not a mathematician. I retract whatever I said.
yeah, that's fine, that's fine.
Yeah.
Uh, but even principally, at least taking the extracts of what you said,
Hmm.
uh, math conforms to a certain set of logics, same as a language. There is actually a debate between mathematics being a language or a science, and that is
Hmm.
a different debate altogether.
Hmm.
But the purpose of art, and I think my opinion here would probably solidify the previous statement about the whole question being quite difficult to answer in the first place. Art, by nature, was made to surpass these horizons,
So,
and something that art has, at least in the 19th and 20th century, has been something that doesn't really conform to our standard realistic logic.
so art is meant to surpass what exactly? Logic,
Our general notion of reality.
general notion of reality. Uh-huh. Okay.
I mean, it essentially solidifies the original statement you made about the whole question being very difficult to answer, and there is no black and white, and there is no answer immediately.
There is an answer, but you
I
have to
mean,
go through this debate process to find it. That's
I
the reason. Yeah,
I'd
yeah,
like,
Kritik.
yeah, I'd like to get back to the math thing. Hopefully, you can close it up because
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to move on to the other thing. But we mentioned addition, but addition itself is an axiom, which is a law which has no reasoning behind it. It's just a logic. There is no reasoning behind it. It just is. There is no reasoning behind it. So
By definition, axioms don't really have a definition, and by
it is
its very nature,
automatically taken true.
yeah,
That's
it
it.
is automatically presumed to be true. True.
And that's what I felt the parallel for mathematics and trying to
Isn't that a
find
law that?
No, it's not a law.
law,
Axiom.
theory, axiom, everything is different meanings.
Okay, okay, okay. Sorry, I didn't know.
Yeah, axioms and postulates. That is how the general framework arrives.
So yeah, addition is a axiom. That means it is a statement that is assumed to be true because
It
we
is
can't really prove.
self-explanatory. For example,
Yeah.
a triangle. Sorry, I'm a maths teacher, so I can help it
Yeah,
out.
go on, please go on.
That's great.
So in a triangle, sum of interior angle is
180 degrees.
So there is no any proof that you can just state. You can by construction, by measuring, you can just show that, but you can't bring out of the blue that why it is 180 degree, because by its nature it is 180 degree. So it's self-explanatory. So those are called axioms. There are theorems, very different than axioms.
Theorems are explanations, whereas axioms are merely observations.
Yeah, they are self-explanatory axioms. So we don't need any thesis to prove that okay, this is true, this is false. So yeah, axioms, theorem, mathematically they are very different. But what you are saying, yeah, it's completely valid.
I learned something new today. Very happy about that. Thanks, Kritik and Mohammed and Nikhil.
No problem.
Always welcome.
You're too modest, but you know,
No, I'm terrible at math. So, yeah, I have no idea about any of these things.
But Vivek, most
Mohammed,
of the best
yeah.
mathematicians are terrible at math.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Then I should take a spin at it. So, Mohammed, you were talking about that a work has to resonate over generations, right? I've dropped a link in the chat
Mm-hmm.
for a film called The Act of Reading. It's a
Mm-hmm.
recently made documentary, and I would encourage you to watch it.
Yeah, yeah.
Director's name is Mark Bloomberg. Act of Reading. So it's a documentary about Moby Dick and the author and how it has been used as a class reading activity for many generations. And it's the story is centered about, well, not story, the documentary is centered around a student who failed the English class because of this Moby Dick assignment. Then years later, he did a lot of research on Moby Dick and about the author and all these things, and read the book again and went back to the English teacher to share what he learned, because this was made a big impact on him. That how could he fail English class? It's such a simple thing. And so in the process of doing that, he learns so much about that book that it was written in a way that the writer takes over your subconscious and you have that experience with the characters, and the interpretations are open to how you imagine it.
Very true. Very true.
So it doesn't matter what your background is. You might be a maths teacher in India, but the author of Moby Dick was in 1600s United
1800s,
States
I think.
or 1800s United States, but you and him will find a connection together from that work. And the English teacher does a great job of explaining why this book is so important. So I would recommend you to take a look at that film,
Yeah, yeah. I will
because
definitely go through it. Vivek. Thank you for dropping
this
it.
whole experience about literature connecting to a person over a period of years, that film does it beautifully. And I wish we had more room in the curation, then this film would have made it there.
Yeah, and please make sure to share other movies too on the theme, because you have to limit yourself for the weekends, but
Mhm.
feel free to share other curated means what to say.
All the shortlist.
Yeah, content, other movies, shortlisted
Okay,
or
okay.
longlisted.
One of our members in the group, Wadlow Manga, is maintaining a list of all the recommendations from Telegram.
Oh, okay.
So
I'll drop
I'll
a message to him in the
no, I'll send you a link right now to
Mhm.
take a look. He has made a letterbox list with some, how many films? 600 films maybe.
My God, on this theme.
Not on this theme,
So,
but
Vivek, there is we don't really have, he doesn't really have the list of all the films that we have to, I mean,
not not our
added to our
list.
recommendation list.
Member suggestions.
Member suggestions mostly.
Member suggestions.
I think this month had around 150 films in the primary recommendation list, and about 25 to 30 films in the shortlist, and 10 films in the final list.
Mhm.
Hmm.
But I have this. I don't know why I have learned this habit, but I need a academic background for watching some movies. So that I can study about those movie
Vivek,
and I
stop
enhance.
the
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I think we can stop the stream if we are done talking about the film.
Oh yeah, yeah. Please,
Yeah,
Vivek.
do we have anything, any other points about the
Kritik,
film?
Kritik was
No,
saying
no,
something.
no.
Oh yes.
Not about the film. No.
But before we end, like, since we talked about the film from so many different angles, does that change your perception about the film to some degree? Does it
Shall
make you
I?
think about it differently? Yes, please. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I really learned a lot. I especially thanks to Vivek because you brought up very symbolic, metaphorical things in the movie which I didn't observe. Like first you mentioned that girl, no, even that girl has to apply for a permit to get her book published. It was very ironic. Yeah, it shows that how that censorship dominates our writing, our thoughts, how states try to what to say dominate us from all perspective, and yeah, and I may not agree with other part that that subway how he got there and how he traveled, but I may have to ponder on it and go through the movie again to appreciate your points. But the you mentioned about the water books coming out and he's trying to save those, and the most important was that the man in the cave, he was the same man. It never flashed me. I will definitely go through again through the movie again so that I may recognize your points and try to see the movie from that perspective. What you have pointed some points.
Yeah, the cave to uh, subway station was metaphorical. Tunnels back in the day were canals, tunnels in the future are trains. And they were showing the transition that, okay, now we've come to the new world, and where do you see any sign of culture here? No, the trees are still dead. That means there's no water here. So, but yeah, like you said, watch the film again and try to see if something makes sense, and uh, try to also look for the old man with the bread. I think he is the Hafiz guy. I'm not confident about this, but I think the old man by the stream with the big bread is a personification of Hafiz, the same actor playing the bearded guy.
Yeah, I had this question that how can he be so generous to give it in a cloth and give a bread
Hmm.
to? So it may be metaphorical that he's earning his bread
Earning
from
his
these
bread.
poets.
That's what I thought also.
Yeah,
But
it's logical there. We can
hmm,
assume that too.
okay, I think Kritik may not be here.
Yeah, yeah. He may.
Okay, okay. Nikhil, should I wrap up? At least stop the stream?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.